Hi, this is Jeff Pospisil, the 10-Minute Treasurer with practical advice for improving your church's financial future. So this is part of my budgeting series that I'm doing, and it's on building or using the reserves. Reserves, you could use the term church savings or whatever it is. It's savings with a purpose. And I think churches should save money, especially when they have, you may not know the timing of an expense, but you should know it's coming up. So if you have a boiler, there's going to be a day when you have to replace that boiler. If you have a van, if you're planning on replacing that van, there's going to be a day when that comes due. There's always going to be an unexpected expense. And a lot of times, what churches end up doing is they neglect saving for it, so then they have to go into emergency capital campaign mode, and that's not a great position to be, and it shakes your faith in the leadership. Before we go too far into that, though, I want to make sure we're on the same page when it talks about how money is restricted within the church world, and that we have a strategy for how to use that. So the first type of restricted money is donor restricted money. And this is money where a donor has given a gift and they've set clear parameters on how that money should be used. And so if a valid use of that money comes up and I get a choice between using donor restricted or any other kind of money, I'm using donor restricted because that's how you release that money from restriction. And I like the greatest amount of freedom as possible for my leadership in running the church. And donor restricted is very uh, does not allow for great freedom. The next one is board restricted, and there's various good reasons for the board to set aside money for a specific purpose. The church board could do it, the church can do it as a whole, or even a committee can do it. They can go ahead and designate it. And there's going to be times when it's very appropriate to use. Hopefully, they have that clearly defined what is an appropriate use for that money. And the last one is just your unrestricted money. And that's just everything else. That's not hasn't been donor restricted, hasn't been board restricted. That's what's commonly known as your general fund. And a good example of this is actually a roof project for Yankton United Methodist Church. And large project, took a capital campaign, had to raise some money for it. And a lot of effort went to raising money for this. This isn't exactly an unexpected expense. We just didn't know the timing of it. And guess what? Once they get that new roof on, 20 or 30 years from now, they're going to need to raise money again for that, unless they start saving right now. And Yankton's just a great example, period, because they have a van and they've already started raising money for replacing that van. I mean, that's how it should work. Is you know an expense is going to come up, and instead of just I don't know, hoping for the best or trying to hope that it falls on somebody else's lap, we start taking care of it ourselves. And instead of us um, maybe getting a loan and having to pay the bank interest, the bank pays interest to us. So, real example, trustees should probably have a reserve account. This is a slide from a previous video, but this shows a typical trustee's budget. And normally you got the church maintenance one and then the parsonage maintenance ones. Those are the ones that are prone to unexpected expenses. And so what I said was to let's budget on the high side. Let's budget on what's probably going to be more than enough for this. And then anything unspent on a typical year, there'll be something unspent. Let's go ahead and put that into savings. And then if you can invite people if they want to donate to that reserve, that's fine too. But let's at least plan on putting something into that fund. And then let's go ahead and I would set up separate bank accounts. I would have a trustee's savings, and I think other ones that might have unexpected costs might be in worship and office savings. And then memorials has a different thing, but those are donor restricted usually, or at least they're usually designated. But let's go ahead and set up separate bank accounts. I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, Jeff, you're making silos. We fight that all the time. The trustees have a silo and the worship committee has a silo. And now you want the office to have a silo and they have control over these money. And how we don't want to fight that anymore. And here's the thing. I grew up on a farm And I didn't have silos, but I had grain bins. And guess what? The grain bin didn't make a decision on when the money was getting out of there or when the grain was getting out of there. The farmer made the decision. In this case, it happens to be my nephew Chris. The church board makes the ultimate decision on this because they're the ones that see the overall big picture. And for a large unexpected expense where you got to tap into savings, you want somebody that's looking at the big picture to help make the final decision. So here's how it works. Let's just say the office wants to make a major purchase. They would bring that recommendation to the church board, and the church board signs off on it. Or they don't sign off on it. Maybe they reject it. Maybe the office wants to buy a new risograph machine, and the church board says, no, we're not doing that. We're getting away from paper. They're sharing the bigger picture with the office. Or maybe the church board says, hey, the youth room needs to be addressed. Trustees, we're going to allow you to use up to $10,000 from the trustees' reserves to address that, to fix the youth room up. That's how it works, is the church board is the ultimate boss. The trustees are the ones that end up using that money as the church board desires, and it's based on the approval of the church board. Again, the silo or the grain bin does not make the decision. The farmer makes the decision. So one of the things too, I want to just put this out there, is that some of those reserves are going to be large, and they're going to be for expenses that may be way down the future. When we're talking about trustees, we know the boiler is going to break down someday, but we don't know when. So it might be worth investing it. And I'm just throwing out the Dakota's United Methodist Foundation or the Minnesota United Methodist Foundation. Somehow invest it with something that'll give you a good return over the long term. So that's just a smart thing to do, because you invest $30,000, and if you're getting 7-10% return, that ends up multiplying your money pretty quickly. The next thing, and this is important, is that any reserve fund that you set up needs to have a goal. You need to know when you got there, because the tendency is, oh, you can never have enough. I mean, if I'm the trustees and I know I got to replace a roof and a boiler and a parking lot and who knows all what, I mean, shoot, I would aim for $1 million plus, depending on the size of your church, because it'll just make life easier the more money you have there. But set a reasonable goal so that way we know when we got there. And then whatever we're short on coming for a project, that's an all right thing to fundraise for. Your donors will respect that, hey, we have X amount for starting it off, whatever it is, but we need your help on finishing it out. Your donors will respect that. So a goal for the trustees might be 10% of the insured value of the building, whether it's the parsonage or the church building. That's usually fairly appropriate, and they'll take care of most of your larger projects. I'm a big Dave Ramsey fan, so having 3 to 6 months of expenses in an emergency fund, that's a good deal. If you can do that, that'll help you if there's a shortfall, like maybe there's a pandemic, or in the case that maybe there's a ministry opportunity, all of a sudden you're set up for that. For your worship committee, maybe it's having 100% of the worship budget there. It gives you a clear thing to aim at. So we're aiming for 100% of the worship budget, and that will cover their large unexpected costs. For the office budget, maybe it's 2 times the replacement cost of the copier, because that way you're covering computers and copier if that's ends up being the need, or whatever it is. So anyway, just set a goal. That's important. Otherwise, it'll just provide satisfaction. So let's go ahead and shift gears, because a lot of churches are not in that situation where they're deciding where to put their excess money. I would guess the vast majority of churches are like, Jeff, every year we are spending more out of our CDs or whatever. That's probably what their reserves are in CDs or some other savings account. Every year we're spending more than we're bringing in, and we're in trouble that way. What do we do? So that is a different conversation we're going to have now. So I'm going to disappoint some people here, because there's not going to be any quick, slick budgeting trick. I've had churches come to me, look over their budget, and I do it, and I don't think I've ever found barely anything that accounts to much savings. I'm not any smarter than they are. So here's the first thing you actually need to do is you need to focus on discipling people in the area of their giving, on the area of their generosity. So this is a poster from Sioux Falls, Asbury about wrestling over money. You need to invite people to actually grow in this area. And it is funny how I've had so many broke churches say, "Oh, we can't talk about money because people won't give." Well, you're in a broke church. People aren't giving right now. So let's go ahead and let's do it with respect. Do it with the idea of helping them grow spiritually. We're not trying to condemn people. We're not trying to get them to support our budget. We want the best for them, and that's why we encourage them to give generously, because we think God will do something awesome as a result of their getting money right in their life. Second thing is, let's go ahead and get very focused and clear on our reserves that we do have. A lot of times the church will have X number of funds, and let's make sure we know if it's a donor restricted fund, what are the restrictions? Can we use that? Because sometimes that might be the better way to provide at least a little bit of cushion. Is, can we use some of our donor restricted funds that we've been setting aside or trying to protect? Why don't we use those if there's a good purpose for them? What about the reserves? Are we unnecessarily tying our hands? And then the last thing to do is let's go ahead and look through our budget. Make sure our budget is accurate. Get it down to a very accurate budget, so you know exactly what your income is expecting. If you normally bring in $85,000 of income, don't put down $100,000 so it matches what your expected expenses are. Let's get it right. So if you have to budget $85,000 in income and $100,000 in expenses, and those seem reasonably accurate and they're comparable to prior years, normally you lose $10,000 to $15,000 a year. Let's go ahead and budget accurately. Let's get that right. Then let's just go ahead and do the math then. I mean, I don't know how many people just hum and haw over this, but if you know that you're losing $10,000 to $15,000 a year, and you have $50,000 in your CDs that are cushioning you, then you know you only have maybe 3 to 4 years. That's all you have. If you don't change anything, that's how many years you have until you are really done as a church, when you're going to basically start digging into debt to operate. And churches don't do that. They just close. So let's go ahead and do that math. And you're still going to focus on generosity, and you're going to focus on if you can use your donor restricted money. And if you can start turning the corner, and if you can start seeing a bright light, so that maybe the next year, instead of $10,000 to $15,000 in the hole, maybe you're 8,000, and then the next year you're only 5,000, and then you can kind of see it. But if you're not able to turn the corner for whatever reason, then you can make plans the other way. Okay, maybe our current staffing doesn't work. Maybe it's our property. Maybe whatever it is. What's costing you that you just need to make a change if you want to still be in ministry 5 to 10 years from now. And then you're going to have to stay the course. I mean, it's so easy for us to go and worry about finances and budget in the fall of the year, and when you're setting up the next year's budget, October, November, December, you're worrying about finances, and then you kind of ignore it until next year. But no, if you want to turn things around, stay the course, get a clear plan. We're going to focus on generous givers. We're going to use our restricted funds. We're going to run a realistic budget, and then let's see about turning things around. Stay the course, stay the plan, and if you start making progress on that, that'll be encouraging. Stay the course. If your church is doing life-changing ministry like so many of our churches are, the church is worth you focusing on this and turning things around. And so that eventually one of these days, instead of you drawing from your CDs, you're instead putting into savings account for the future. So, all right, that brings us to the end of this. And again, this is a ministry of the Finance Office of the Dakotas Conference, as well as the Dakotas United Methodist Foundation. Again, if you like this, go ahead and like, subscribe, share, And find more of our stuff at www.dakotasumc.org or dakotasumf.org. All right, till next time.